It was 11:47 p.m. when I heard the organ start playing. I want to be precise about the time because precision is the only thing I have left. Everything else about that night has been picked apart by memory and doubt until I cannot fully trust it, but the time I know. I had checked my phone 11 minutes earlier when I dropped my inventory clipboard and it skidded under the pew. 11:36. I picked it up. I walked back to the sacristy. I sat down at the small desk Father Dahlin used for his private correspondence, and I began working through the list of communion vessels that needed to be counted before the diocesan visit on Saturday. 11 minutes of silence and the scratch of pen on paper. Then the organ. I had been working as the facilities manager at St. Michael's for 3 weeks. The job was not complicated. Maintenance scheduling, vendor coordination, opening and closing the building. Night closing was my responsibility 5 days a week. The last person out, responsible for every lock, every light, every exterior door. I had done it 17 times. I had developed the routine the way you develop any routine, through repetition until it becomes automatic. Sacristy, nave, side chapels, choir, loft, staircase check, fellowship hall, boiler room, exterior circuit. Every door tested, every light off. I was thorough. I was thorough because Father Dahlin had impressed upon me in my first week that the building had experienced 2 break-ins in the past 4 years, and that security was not something to approach casually. I am telling you this because I need you to understand. I knew that building was empty, not believed it was empty. Knew. I had walked every room 40 minutes before I sat down with that clipboard. I had tested the loft staircase door myself. It was locked from a panel in the sacristy, separate from the main lock system, and I had engaged it personally. There was no way into the loft from inside the building without a key, and the only key besides my own was in Father Dahlin's desk, which was also locked. The music was not a hymn. That was the first thing I noticed, not the impossibility of it, not the fact that there was no one there to play, but the music itself. I knew every standard hymn well enough to recognize them. This was not any of them. It moved slowly, one note following another with long pauses between, like someone searching in the dark for a melody they only half remembered. It was not beautiful. It was deliberate, patient in a way that felt studied, as if whatever was playing understood that I was listening and was in no particular hurry. I sat at the desk for a long time before I moved. I can admit that now. I sat there with my pen still in my hand and my eyes on the sacristy doorway, and I did not move because some part of me understood that moving would require a decision, and making a decision would require acknowledging what was happening, and acknowledging what was happening was not something I was ready to do. The music stopped. The silence that replaced it was not ordinary silence. There is a silence that is simply the absence of sound, and there is a silence that has texture, that presses against you, that makes you aware of your own breathing and your own heartbeat with an intimacy that feels like exposure. The silence after the organ was the second kind. It filled the building the way water fills a container, completely, evenly, finding every corner. I made myself stand. I made myself walk to the sacristy doorway and look out into the nave. The emergency lighting was on, the dim red glow that stayed on all night, enough to see the rows of pews running toward the altar, the windows above dark and lightless, the wooden panels of the reredos behind the altar catching a faint reflection of red. The loft was above and behind me over the main entrance, accessible by the narrow staircase whose door I had locked. Nothing moved. Nothing was out of place. I walked to the loft staircase door. I do not fully understand why. Some reflex of logic, the need to confirm what I already knew, the door would be locked, there would be no explanation, and I would file it somewhere in the part of my mind reserved for things I did not want to examine too closely, and I would go home and I would sleep. The door was locked. I checked it. Solid, no give. I stood there with my hand on the handle and I looked at the door and I thought, The loft is empty. No one is up there. You locked the door yourself. Old organs have mechanical faults. Air pressure bellows something. You imagined the music being intentional. You imagined it having quality. You are tired and you are alone and the building is old and that is all this is. Then the stairs creaked. Once from somewhere near the top. I did not move. Every muscle in my body locked simultaneously. The creak had been unmistakable, the specific complaint of old wood under weight, weight that shifted and settled, the sound a stair makes when a person takes a step and pauses. I had climbed those stairs twice in my 3 weeks at St. Michael's. I knew exactly what they sounded like. Another creak, lower this time, a second step. Whatever was in the loft was coming down the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, moving purely on instinct, putting something solid at my... The creak came again, closer. I could hear it moving through the door, the particular quality of old stairs in an enclosed space, each step a small announcement. Third, fourth. The staircase had 14 steps. Whatever this was had now taken 4 of them. It was getting closer to the door, getting closer to me. I want to tell you that I felt rage or courage or some useful emotion. I did not. What I felt was a coldness that started at the base of my skull and moved down through my entire body in a single wave, followed by a stillness that I recognized later as the way extreme fear manifests when there is nowhere to run, a biological shutdown of everything unnecessary, leaving only the senses, working at a sharpness I had never experienced before or since. 7th step. 8th. I could hear breathing now. I want to be careful with this claim because I know how it sounds. But I was pressed against a thin door in a silent building, and I am telling you that I heard it, slow, measured inhalation and exhalation, the breathing of something that was not hurrying, the breathing of something that was not afraid. The footsteps stopped. Based on what I could hear, they had stopped 3 steps from the bottom, 3 steps from the door, 3 steps from where I was standing with my back against the wall, my body not moving, my hand still holding my phone which I had drawn from my pocket without remembering doing it. We stayed like that for a long time. I say we because there was clearly something on the other side of that door. I could feel it the way you feel a presence in a dark room before your eyes adjust, a displacement of attention, an awareness that the space is occupied. My phone screen had gone dark and the red emergency lighting was the only illumination. I stood in it and I listened and I waited, and whatever was 3 steps up the other side of the door waited with me. Then it exhaled. A single long breath released slowly, the sound of something that has been holding itself carefully for a very long time and has finally allowed itself to relax. It came through the gap at the bottom of the door, actually moved the air on my side of the door, touched my ankles. I left the building. I did not run. I want you to understand that. I walked. Quickly, but I walked because I had understood with sudden clarity that running would confirm something, would change the nature of what was happening in a way I was not equipped to survive. I walked to the side door. I pushed it open with both hands. I stepped into the parking lot into the cold November air, and I walked to my car and I got in and I locked the doors and I sat there. I sat there for 41 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. In the morning, I told Father Dahlin there was a mechanical issue with the organ and that a technician would need to inspect it before anyone used the loft. He received this without visible concern. He said that was probably wise. He said the previous facilities manager had mentioned something similar before he had stopped coming in. He said it the way you mention a detail that has long since lost its power to disturb you. I asked what had happened to the previous facilities manager. Father Dahlin considered the question. Then he said he supposed the man had simply moved on, that people moved on, that this was the nature of things. He returned to his correspondence. I finished out the week. I processed what I could and stored the rest in that place in the mind where unresolvable things are kept. 2 years later, I read a small article in a local paper about renovation work at St. Michael's. The loft staircase had been replaced. Structural compromise, the article said. The wood had deteriorated in a pattern that the contractors had not been able to explain, not rot, not age, not pest damage, just compression, as if something had been standing on those stairs for a very long time. The inspector had no explanation. I did not need one. I joined the choir because my therapist said I needed structure. 3 months later, I would have given anything to have taken up running instead. Holy Redeemer was a large, active parish, 700 families, a full calendar of services and events, the kind of place that felt alive in the way that large institutions feel alive, with the constant movement of people and purpose. The choir practiced every Thursday at 7 p.m. in the basement. I joined in September, the 1st. I needed somewhere to be on Thursday evenings that was not my apartment, and I had a serviceable alto voice from high school that I had been assured was sufficient. The basement was fully finished but clearly old. Drop ceiling with water-stained tiles in the corners. Linoleum floors with the particular dull quality of linoleum that has been cleaned 10,000 times and will never look new again. Fluorescent lights that provided adequate illumination in a way that somehow made the room feel more enclosed rather than less. At the back, past the last row of folding chairs, there was a storage room. The storage room held robes, spare music stands, decades of accumulated hymnals and sheet music, and a door that would not fully close because the latch had broken sometime in the past and no one had arranged for it to be repaired. It sat open perhaps 3 inches always, the darkness inside visible as a thin vertical strip at the edge of every rehearsal. Patricia Marsh had been directing the choir for 12 years. She was the kind of director who was difficult and essential in equal measure, demanding without being unkind, precise without losing the music in the precision. I respected her immediately. So did everyone. There were 11 of us in total, ranging from members who had been there for over a decade to those, like me, who were new that fall. The first incident happened on the 2nd Thursday of October. We were running through a contemporary setting of the Agnus Dei, not an easy piece. Lots of independent voice movement, complex page turns in the middle section. We had been at it for perhaps 40 minutes and were finally beginning to hold it together when Patricia stopped us mid-phrase. She did not tap her stand. She simply stopped conducting and let her hands fall and looked toward the back of the room. We followed her gaze. The storage room door, open its usual 3 inches, the thin strip of darkness inside. Patricia asked very calmly who had been singing the descant line. We looked at each other. There was no descant written into the piece. No one had been assigned one. Several of us said as much. Patricia said nothing for a moment. Then she said she had heard a voice clearly above the soprano line, coming from the direction of the storage room, following the melodic contour of the piece with what she described as complete accuracy. She walked to the storage room and opened the door fully and looked inside for a long time. Then she closed it as far as it would close, which was not fully, and walked back to her stand and tapped it twice and started us from the top. She did not explain. We did not ask. We finished the rehearsal. In the parking lot afterward, I fell into step beside Gerald, who had been in the choir for 11 years and I had learned, a particular quality of stillness that I associated with people who had long since made peace with something. I asked him if that had happened before. He said yes. I asked him how many times. He thought about it. He said he had stopped counting after the first few years. I asked what Patricia had told him about it. He said Patricia had not told him anything. He said Father Mitchell had blessed the space twice, once in the summer of his 3rd year in the choir and once the following winter. He said it had not made a particular difference. I asked Gerald what he thought it was. He looked at the church building across the parking lot. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he was not going to answer. Then he said he thought it was someone who had not been ready to stop. He got in his car. I drove home and did not sleep well. The incidents continued through October and into November, becoming neither more nor less frequent, simply present. A feature of Thursday evenings, the way the broken latch was a feature of Thursday evenings. The voice came and went. Sometimes only Patricia heard it. Sometimes 2 or 3 of us heard it simultaneously. It always came from the back of the room, always during the music, always following the written melody accurately but singing something slightly above it, a descant that seemed to anticipate the harmonic turns of pieces it could not have rehearsed. We did not talk about it among ourselves. This was a collective, unspoken agreement that I understood completely without anyone articulating it. There are situations in which naming a thing gives it a reality that silence withholds, and we were all, I think, choosing silence. The last Thursday before Thanksgiving, we had a long session. Patricia wanted to push through the entire Christmas program, beginning to end, to identify where we still needed work. We started at 7, and it was past 9 when we reached the final movement of the last piece. A longer setting, complex, something Patricia had introduced that fall, and that we had been struggling with for weeks. We had been playing it straight through for the 3rd time. I was reading the music and watching Patricia, and listening to the 11 voices around me find each other in the difficult final section, and something was going right that had not gone right before. Some alignment was happening, and I felt the specific satisfaction of music working the way it is supposed to work. Patricia stopped conducting. Not gradually, all at once. Her hands dropped to her sides and she stood at her stand and stared at the back of the room with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I turned with the others. The storage room door was closed, not open its usual 3 inches, not slightly ajar, fully, completely closed. The broken latch somehow engaged. I heard someone near me make a very small sound, the sound a person makes when they have seen something that takes a moment for the mind to process. Patricia told us in a completely level voice to collect our things and go upstairs and wait for her in the narthex. We went. All 11 of us, coats and bags, up the stairs and through the door and into the narthex where we stood without speaking. After 4 minutes, Patricia came up. She said rehearsal was concluded for the evening. She said she would see us next week. Her voice had the particular controlled quality of someone who is managing something carefully. Everyone left. When the last car had pulled away, I found Patricia still in the narthex, her coat on, not moving toward the door. I asked her what she had seen. She was quiet long enough that I began to think she would not tell me. Then she said that when she had gone to the storage room and attempted to open the door, it had opened inward before she had touched it. She said she had stood in the doorway and looked at what was inside. I asked what was inside. She said there was a music stand in the center of the room, not against the wall where the stands were kept, in the center, with a piece of sheet music on it. Sheet music she did not recognize, not from our library, not in any hand she knew, not any setting of any text she could identify. She said the notation was correct, fully notated, complete. She said the voice part written on it was a soprano descant. I asked what she had done with it. She said she had taken it to Father Mitchell that night, directly from the church to the rectory, and placed it in his hands. I asked what Father Mitchell had done. She said he had looked at it for a long time. Then he had looked at her. Then he had told her he would take care of it and had thanked her for bringing it to him. She said she had never seen it again. She had not asked. I drove home and sat in my driveway for a long time. I finished the Christmas season with the choir. It was a good concert. The final program came together in the way that difficult things sometimes do, with a rightness at the end that is inseparable from the difficulty of the process. In the back of the room during the performance, 3 people who had been sitting near me afterwards said they had heard a voice above the soprano line during the Agnus Dei. A voice from the back, following the music, not on the program. In January, Patricia announced she was stepping down as director. The new director took over in February. At his first rehearsal, he noticed the storage room had been sealed, not locked, sealed. A new door fitted with no handle painted over. He asked if anyone could explain it. Nobody answered him. I left the choir in March. I told myself it was because the Thursday schedule had become inconvenient. I have not fully convinced myself of that. I was 23 years old when I agreed to stay overnight at St. Agatha's, and I have spent the 11 years since then trying to find an explanation for what happened that would let me stop thinking about it. I have not found one. The retreat was an Advent overnight, a youth ministry event. 6 teenagers between the ages of 14 and 17, 2 adult chaperones. I was one of the chaperones. The other was a man named Dave, 40-something, a veteran of these events who treated the logistics of wrangling teenagers through a church overnight with the practiced calm of someone who had done it many times and knew exactly what to expect. He did not know what to expect this time. St. Agatha's was a mid-century parish church in the suburbs, concrete construction, pale brick exterior, functional and plain in the architectural language of its era, the kind of building that communicates practicality over beauty. The fellowship hall was attached to the main church by a covered interior corridor, maybe 30 feet of enclosed walkway with a linoleum floor and no windows. The sanctuary itself was accessed from one end of the corridor, the fellowship hall. At 9 p.m., after evening prayer concluded, Father Carey locked the sanctuary. He gave Dave the key in case of emergency and left. The understanding was that we would not need it. The teenagers were tired. 2 were asleep before 10:30. The rest followed before 11. Dave and I had cots along the far wall. He was asleep within minutes of lying down. I was not tired. I lay on my cot reading until past midnight, aware of the building around me in the particular way you become aware of old buildings when you are the only one awake in them. The heating system clicking on every 40 minutes, the distant settling of structural elements cooling in the night air, the specific silence of a space that was built for large gatherings and is now occupied by 8 quietly breathing people and nothing else. At 12:34 a.m., one of the teenagers, she was 15, quiet, one of the more serious kids, the kind of teenager who participated in youth ministry not because her parents made her, but because she had made some private, genuine decision about faith. She was on a cot perhaps 12 feet from mine. She sat up smoothly, without the groggy disorientation of someone waking from deep sleep, and turned her head and looked directly at the corridor door. Just looked at it. I watched her for a moment, then asked. She did not respond. Her eyes were open but had the unfocused, inward quality of someone not fully present sleepwalking, or something near enough to it that the distinction felt irrelevant. I had been told not to wake sleepwalkers abruptly, so I moved to sit closer, watching to make sure she did not try to stand and walk somewhere. She did not stand. She continued to look at the door. Her breathing was slow and even. Her hands rested in her lap, perfectly still. After perhaps 2 minutes she spoke. She said, "He has been waiting a long time." Her voice was completely flat, not frightened, not confused, not performing. The tone of someone conveying information they consider factual and unremarkable. I asked her very quietly who she meant. She did not answer. She lay back down on her own, pulled her blanket up, and was apparently asleep before I could speak again. I sat next to her cot for a long time. At 1:15 a.m., I noticed because I had been timing it unconsciously. 40 minutes between cycles, reliable as a clock. 40 minutes passed, then 45. 50. The fellowship hall became colder in the incremental, deniable way of temperature change, slow enough that I kept second-guessing whether I was imagining it, quick enough that within 20 minutes I had pulled my coat from my bag and put it on. At 1:22 a.m., something moved in the corridor. I want to be precise about what I heard because I have replayed it many hundreds of times since then, testing it against every ordinary explanation, and I can tell you with certainty what it was not. It was not the heating system. It was not structural settling. It was not any of the ambient sounds I had been cataloging for the past hour. It was the sound of something moving, weight shifting on a surface, adjusting position, the specific quality of physical presence rearranging itself in an enclosed space. It came from approximately the middle of the corridor, and after a few seconds it came again, slightly closer to the fellowship hall door. I went to Dave's cot and put my hand on his shoulder and woke him with the particular urgency of someone who has decided they cannot manage alone. He came up fast. I told him something was in the corridor. He listened. We both heard it, the same slow movement, another adjustment closer still. Dave went to the corridor door, opened it, and stepped through. I stood in the fellowship hall doorway and watched him walk the length of the corridor, 30 feet of empty linoleum. He tried the exterior door at the far end, locked. He tried the sanctuary door, locked. He turned on his phone flashlight and checked both walls, the ceiling, He came back and stood in the doorway and told me it was the building settling and that old buildings did this and that I should sleep. He was not a dismissive man. He believed what he was saying. I lay down but did not sleep. I lay on my cot and watched the corridor door and listened. The movement did not come again immediately. It came at 2:10 a.m., a single slow shift from the middle of the corridor, and then silence. And again at 2:47 a.m., closer. Each time I lay perfectly still and listened to it and said nothing. At 3:07 a.m., Mara sat up. She did not look at the corridor door this time. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were focused. She was awake. She said, "Do you hear him now?" I asked what she heard. She said she heard someone walking in the corridor. She said she had been hearing it since before midnight. She said she had not said anything because she had not wanted to be the one who said it. I asked if she had been awake earlier when she had sat up the first time when she had spoken. She looked at me with an expression I have thought about many times since. Something careful in it. Something that seemed to be deciding how much to say. She said she did not remember sitting up earlier. The last thing she remembered before this moment was falling asleep before 11. I waited, she said, but he asked me to tell you something before I went to sleep. I thought it was a dream. He said to tell you that he has been here the whole time, that you would hear him and wonder, and he wanted you to know that he sees you wondering. I asked who had told her this. She looked at me for a long time. The fellowship hall was cold and dim, the emergency lighting throwing everything into a flat red wash. The other teenagers slept. Dave slept. Outside in the corridor, something shifted its weight one more time and then went completely still. Mara said, "I don't think I should tell you that. I think if I tell you that it will frighten you more than anything else that has happened tonight." She lay down. She turned on her side. Within minutes her breathing slowed. I sat up until the light changed outside the high windows and the building began to feel different, the particular way that a space changes when night ends and daylight becomes possible. At 5:45 a.m. I walked the corridor myself. I don't know It was empty, of course. Linoleum, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old building that corridors like that always carry. I stood in the middle of it and looked at both doors and listened. Nothing. The silence of a building in early morning, the absence of anything that should not have been there. At 6 a.m., Father Carey arrived to unlock the sanctuary for morning prayer. He unlocked the door and pushed it open and stopped. I was behind him. I saw what he saw. All 6 altar keys, burning steadily, their flames straight and still in the windless air of the sealed room, burning with the specific steadiness of candles that have been alight for hours. Father Carey stood in the doorway for a very long time. Then he went in. He did not explain. He began the service. We all filed in behind him. No one mentioned the candles at breakfast. Not the teenagers, not Dave, not Father Carey. We ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable but was complete. The silence of a group of people who have tacitly agreed that some things are better carried quietly. I drove home at 8 and sat in my car in my own driveway for a long time with my hands in my lap and my eyes on the middle distance. I have not been back to St. Agatha's. I have thought many times about reaching out to Mara. She is in her mid-20s now, living somewhere across the country, as far as I can tell from the small amount I have been able to find. I have composed the message in my head. I have never sent it. Some part of me understands that she told me what she was willing to tell me that night, and that whatever she withheld for a reason, and that asking her now would be asking her to revisit something she may have worked hard to put down. He has been waiting a long time. I have turned that sentence over so many times in the years since that the words themselves have become strange to me, emptied of meaning through repetition. And then something will happen, a cold night, a building that settles in a particular way, the specific quality of silence in an old room, and the sentence will fill back up again, heavy and precise, and I will understand exactly what it meant. I still do not know what he was waiting for. I think about the fact that we left in the morning and the building was still there. The corridor, the altar, the candles burned down to nothing by then, certainly, but the holders still on the altar, the pews, the locked doors. I think about the fact that he was presumably still there too. I try not to think about whether he is waiting still.